Good morning. My name is Ellen Cushing, and I am a strategic account manager with Elanco Animal Health based in Wisconsin. And I'm joined here today with Dr. David Prentice. Dr. Dave Prentice obtained his DVM in 1991 at Iowa State University and spent the first 7 years of his career in a mixed private practice in Northeast Iowa, followed by exclusive dairy practice in Tulare, California. In the year 2000, he obtained his master's in dairy science from the University of Wisconsin, where he researched ionophores and subacute ruminal acidosis. Dr. Prentice has been in various industry positions since leaving practice and is presently a technical consultant for Elanco Animal Health in the dairy business unit supporting various geographies. He and his family live in Northeast Iowa. So today we're going to do a Q&A on some questions that we commonly receive regarding fly control heading into the fall. In our last DCHA session, we talked a lot about larvicides and premise sprays. So if you missed that, check it out after this on any DCHA platforms. And if you have any questions today, feel free to put those in the comments. All right, Dr. Prentice, let's go ahead and kick this off. So now that we are getting into cooler weather, it seems as though the fly problems are winding down. Do we still need to be worrying about flies?
Yeah, it's a good question, Ellen. I'm guessing at this point, most producers know if their fly control program worked for the year or not. If you're still battling a large fly population, if you still see a lot of flies around, then my guess is you probably had a poor season of control. On the flip side of that, if your fly populations are pretty low, easily manageable with, some just light fogging or spraying, and you're just not seeing that many flies, then I would say your fly control program worked. And I would bet in those cases that those were probably successful larvicide. Those were operations that got on the larvicides appropriately earlier in the year. So yeah, we still are seeing flies. Obviously it's region dependent. In the upper Midwest where I live, we still have heat and humidity, so the flies are still going to be there. Don't wish for that first frost too soon.
Yeah, so for the guy that is still yeah, true. For the people that are still battling a large population of flies, what would be your advice for them?
Yeah, well, so my advice really doesn't change. If you're still battling a large population of flies, my recommendations are what they would be in the spring. You're just behind it a little bit. So I still think if your populations are large, you still need to use a larvicide because obviously the more live flies you have, the more potential that there is in the future for more flies, because you got to think of the fly population as like an iceberg, and what we're seeing is the tip of the iceberg, because every fly can lay a ton of eggs. So we still need to look for that place where they're laying the eggs, especially if you have a large population. I had a conversation with a really frustrated producer this week. She called me and she was describing her situation. They still had cows bunching, and I'd never been to this dairy. And we were playing phone tag and kept getting disconnected. But on the last call before I got disconnected with her, I had her address. So I Google search. I looked up the farm on Google Earth, and I took a snapshot and I was drawing arrows and saying, okay, check this place and check this, and you need to look at this. And I kind of blew it up, and I was assuming it was her farm. I didn't even know. Well, she called back and I said, "Is this your farm?" And she said, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, I'm going to send you this picture." And we kind of described it on the phone, and she was really frustrated because all of the places that I said, there's probably rotting organic matter here, check this for, and again, you're on Google Earth, right? It's not like I'm walking around doing a fly audit. But she's like, yeah, I checked all those problems. We had some stuff there. I cleaned it up. We used larvicide here, and I didn't even think it was worth it because there really wasn't anything there. And she was just like, I did everything that you're talking about, and I've cleaned all those areas, and we still have a bunch of flies. And I said, well, how close is your closest neighbor? And she's like, well, just across the street. Again, went back to Google Earth, and it's like, oh yeah, there's a bunch of farms right there. So flies can actually be a community problem. And I'm guessing that might be the situation here, despite that farm doing really good control. If they're close proximity, flies will travel, and that may have been the situation in that case. I'm biased because I spend most of my time out west, and the west is a little bit different. You got large farms, and the neighboring farms not very close, unless you're in California, of course. So yeah, it's I guess my advice doesn't change. Continue to look for those flies and where they're egg laying, breeding, and or particularly where they're laying the eggs is probably the main thing.
So sometimes I think people think that a larvicide should be mostly used in like the spring or the earlier part of a fly season, but what you're saying is we should be using it throughout the fall.
Yeah, so larvicides are kind of a full-time deal. They're really your best bet because, again, if you think about the fly population, the largest population of flies is that's not yet buzzing around flying. The largest population is still wherever the breeding area is. So you think maggots. So the 3 stages of maggots, and I can't remember if we showed the life cycle on the last chat, but you've got different stages of maggots. So they start out really small and they get bigger, and then they kind of grow into a pupa, which is just, for the 4 species of flies we're dealing with, it's just a little, think of it as almost like a watermelon seed, a little bit smaller, a little bit rounder. But if you find places where you see lots of those, and that's your target for a larvicide. So yeah, larvicides don't end until probably after the first frost. Now, you don't need to do them daily, of course. That's, once every 2 to 3 weeks should be fine on the larvicides.
Okay, perfect. So you had mentioned fly audits are kind of an option. Can you describe what a fly audit is and when a producer should be considering it?
Yeah, that's okay. I'll handle that first part of that question first. A fly audit is just it's a fancy name for walking around a farm and looking for places to kill flies. I mean, yeah, there's really no official fly audit per se. But again, it's when I do it, if I'm going to do a fly audit on a farm, I kind of have a systematic approach. I like to start with the calf area and just kind of work my way kind of literally right through the chain, right? So I start with the calf area, show me the calf area. Are you having problems where again, out here we have large rooms where they mix the milk replacer and fill the trailers and all that. So, are they having, that's usually a housefly problem in there. Are they having problems there? Then you walk the hutches, check the calves, and then you go over to, if the growing heifers are on the same place, often they're not out here, so you don't get that option. But if the heifer growing pens, you kind of walk through that area. Is it pasture based? Is it not? Is it confined? Is it not? What are the flies there? And then literally just you kind of follow the cows, right? Dry cows, close up, post fresh, maternity, and just kind of walk around the feed centers, the manure areas. What are they doing with the waste feed? So yeah, you're just literally walking around the operation, looking for opportunities to kill flies, particularly where they might be, where their egg laying habitat might be. That's what we're really striving for, is to find that. So that's the first part. When a producer should consider it, that's a great question. We tend to bias towards the spring because getting ahead of fly season. But in all reality, especially with operations, back to your first question, if producers are still having a fly problem, we're probably actually better off to do an audit in the fall, because then we have a better idea of areas to work on over the winter. Can we clean them? Or are these the areas we're going to get on larvicide aggressively early April, or mid to late April, depending on where you live? So I don't. We at Elanco do a lot more in the spring, probably because that's when people are thinking about it. But I think maybe the fall is also a really good time to start thinking about your program next year, especially if you had a bad year, especially if you had a lot of flies this year. You really got to find where the maternity ward is, so to speak, for flies.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I do find that if I'm helping a farm do a fly audit, doing one right now and the fly populations are higher, you tend to see a lot more activity in the breeding grounds, and it makes it a lot easier to point out the areas that need to be sprayed versus coming in like a March or April when it's still kind of early and we need to start spraying, but you're only seeing maybe a couple of eggs here and there.
Yeah. And it kind of goes with our questions, right? I don't know about you, but like I said, in the last month, I've had two questions. One was a raging success, or two producer follow-ups. One was a raging success, and then the other was my frustrated producer that she can't find where the larvae are.
Yeah. So when a farmer is looking at products, like for Elanco alone, we sell porons, premise sprays, larvicides. We've got rubbers, foggers, on-animal sprays, basically everything. We didn't talk a lot about porons in our last session. When should a farmer be considering using a poron?
Wow, that's a good point. Probably my bad. You're right. We do have a lot of porons. Actually, a lot of our chemicals are dual purpose, right? They can be used as a poron, as a rubber, or as a spray. Again, I'm kind of biased because of where I spend most of my time, and most of what I'm seeing is the biggest problem are house flies on calves and in the worker areas, and stable flies on the cows. And when it comes to stable flies on adult cows or on growing heifers, I'm not a big fan of porons, so that's probably why I didn't mention them much. Because you pour along the back, and the stable flies down on the lower legs. But if we shift and start thinking about calves, which are a much smaller animal, they spend a lot more time laying down in a small confined space, especially this time of the year when I say the flies are getting stupid, and the flies aren't really getting stupid. They're just getting slower, right? We start to get those cooler nights, and they start to slow down, particularly at night. So actually, in our calf population, porons may actually be a very good approach because they're easy. You can pour along the back of the line of the calf, and again, it's in that confined space. But to reiterate, a lot of our products that we use as sprays, Permectin 2, Permectin CDS, Silence, all of those can be used as a spray, but they also can be used as a poron. Fall is probably a better time to use it as a poron, because it's pretty, especially in calves. It's pretty easy to spray a calf. They are pretty low anyway. They're small anyway, so they're actually a lot closer to the legs. And a lot of times it's the house fly that's more of a problem in our calf than the stable fly. So yeah, that was a good comment. The poron approach works really good, especially, of course, if you're targeting, some of the, like in the winter, we start running into lice and mange problems, and then absolutely a poron is the way to go.
So you just mentioned like permethrin 2, permethrin CDS, and silence, which obviously are all some of our porons, but probably the one that we talk about the most, or the one that we get asked the most questions on, is Cydectin. What are your thoughts on that one?
Yes, Cydectin. I forgot about Cydectin. Yeah, so Cydectin is compared to all those other products I've mentioned. Cydectin is completely different than everything that we've discussed to date. Cydectin will work good on flies. It's actually our only product that we have, for example, that works on mites, which we haven't discussed at all. But the interesting thing about Cydectin compared to everything that we've talked about in the past regarding flies, Cydectin is not my go-to product for flies, and the reason is because Cydectin is actually not only an external parasite, so think flies, but it also is an internal parasite control, so think worms. So it's not my go-to for flies, the typical fly problem that we talk about when we talk about flies, just because of the cost of that product, because it's actually an internal parasite control. It's a very good internal parasite control, as well as external. So I think we can kill flies cheaper with other products than we can with Cydectin, but Cydectin brings things to the table that all of the other products that I discussed don't. So again, I mentioned mites and lice. Cleanup 2 is my go-to product for lice. It's a one-time application. It has an insect growth regulator that will kill the eggs. You have to pour it correctly. But if you have mites, or if you think you need, if your animals, if your heifers or any of your farms are exposed to pasture anytime during the year, then Cydectin is probably a great fall choice. You can kill some flies with it for sure, but it also works for the internal parasites, lice and mites. So yeah, that's a good product to have in your toolbox. I do know some dairies that will do an annual treatment with Cydectin. In the fall and winter, we have some large dairies actually out here that will do that in the wintertime. And they've done it historically, and they feel it works great, especially on the lice and mites.
So when it comes to porons, I get this question pretty often. Do you recommend that people pour on the whole herd all at once, or is it okay to do it like animal by animal as they cabin or something like that?
Yeah, that's a good question, and each and every farm is different, I guess. So, with for flies, I think it you can do whole herd all at once, and then you can repeat in 14 to 28 days. And again, for flies mid-season, I'm more of a spray guy than a pour-on guy. As we move into fall and late fall, early winter, and especially if you're going to use let's say, for example, you're going to use a pour-on for the last residual fly population, but you also want to go after lice, then I think the way to do it is to do the whole confined herd, right? So do the whole confined herd at once. So all the cows that are in the barn today, you do them. All the calves that are in the hutches today, you do them. Those are the easy populations. The hard populations are the heifers that are in pens without headlocks, or pastures, or not even on your facility. Then with those, what I do, then the way to do that would be to do them either when they come back. It depends where they come back to when they come back to the farm. If heifers come and they're by themselves, then I wouldn't worry about it. But as soon as they're mixed with a cow, either in a far off close up, maternity, when they're in close proximity to the cows, they need to be poured before they, let's say you pour the whole herd in October 1st. Well, by November 1st, if you bring the heifer in that is contaminated next to cows, so if that heifer has lice and you bring her in next to cows, then she can now contaminate the cow that was poured 30 days ago because your insecticide is no longer active. So in that case, you need to pour those heifers that come in before they can expose the herd. The cow that was poured and then she's in the dry pen and she cycles back through, she doesn't need to be poured if she was already poured. So you got to think of it as what are my free zones and what are my contaminated zones, and I don't want to mix my contaminated with my free. So it just kind of depends how your operation works. With if you're after, I talk about those herds that do the sidectin annually, then yeah, it's especially in the winter. I don't get as concerned about internal parasites on confined dairy cows, but as new animals come into the barn, you definitely don't want to bring mites or lice in to your clean animals. So, good question.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Okay, so kind of to wrap up the pour-on conversation, how should a farm choose the best pour-on for them?
Depends what you're targeting, I guess. Again, I'm going to show you my bias. So right now, for me, if I owned a dairy and we're starting to get these cool nights, and I've done a great job with my my larvicides, and I don't really have a ton of flies, but I'm one of those guys where I see one fly on the back of my calf, I don't like it, right? So for me, my pour-on of choice for calves, for flies is going to be permectin CDS. It's just a little thicker. It's got more of an oily type texture, and I just think that I can visibly see it on the back line of the calf. So that's probably my go-to for calves. Not that permectin or silence, not that there's anything wrong with them. And again, it's just my bias on the oily nature. Some people love sidectin because it's purple, right? It's really easy to see A, that the calf is poured, B, did they pour it correctly from stem to stern, and C, it's not that expensive because you're talking about a small animal, right? So the dose is pretty low. So some people do use sidectin for that purpose. It's, like I said, it's probably a little bit more expensive for a fly control, but it brings some other baggage with it that none of our other products have.
Okay, so kind of to summarize the pour-on portion, if I'm understanding you right. Generally speaking, pour-ons can be used in our calves at any time for fly control, and most or several of the products can be sprayed or poured. Spraying might be more effective in warmer times when flies are a bit more active, whereas pour-ons might work a little bit better when the flies are a little slower. And sidectin, you're saying, is our pour-on that's used for both internal and external parasites, including mites, which might be more of a fall-winter problem. Is that kind of the gist of it?
I think you got it. Yep. I think, again, when you think, you think stable flies on adult cows, lower legs, pour-ons don't work very good, sprays. Pour-ons work, I think, probably better in calves, nice at this time of the year. And the cool thing is like you said, many of our products can either be poured or sprayed. So take your choice. It's kind of personal preference, right? I mean, some people hate spraying. I don't. Calves are easy to pour. I'm not a big pour-on guy for cows, right? Because you need to get from stem to stern, and then you're in the lockups. It's a little bit of a safety concern for me. Getting, the cows don't like it. Whereas a spray, I can do more from a distance. So yeah, I think you got it. And then, yeah, you mentioned Cydectin. If mites are your problem, and again, we didn't talk much about mites, and if you have exposure to pasture and or if mites are your problem, then an annual with a Cydectin, particularly in the fall, early winter, is the way to go. So cool. I think you got her.
All right. Well, I'm not seeing any questions in the comments. Do you have anything else that you wanted to add, Dr. Prentice?
No, I guess my only thing would be, again, to reiterate, don't let your guard down. If you had a good year this year, congratulations. Every year is different. But certainly if you had a good year this year, tackle the problem, particularly if you had a good year this year, you probably got your larvicides in the right area. The other thing I will kind of would like to mention is to rotate, right? If you're using, if you used pyrethroids for your Prentice spray this year, you may want to switch and go to a Raybon or an Elector, change chemical class. And again, we've got a 1-page deal that tells you all the chemical class, if they can be pour-on sprayed, however. So yeah, congratulations if you did a good year. Don't let your guard down, and if you're still struggling, continue to try to isolate where the bottom of the iceberg is.
Very good. Yeah, I'll go ahead and I'll pop our contact information up on the screen. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to follow up with myself or Dr. Prentice. And yeah, I think we are good to go here. Thank you all so much for joining us today. And thank you, Dr. Prentice, for answering all those questions.
You bet. Have a great weekend, everybody.